Hi, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time zone you are. And I want to welcome you to the first inaugural Postal Spotlight. And this was something we brought together with a few industry experts, Christine and Paul. I'll have them introduce you in a second. But what we want to do is fill some of the gaps in from the Postal Forum not being live and hopefully provide you some educational content. And so the first topic we have is on data quality, and it's really the catalyst behind this conversation was a Harvard Business Review article on the cost of bad data, and they targeted at $3.1 trillion in citing an IBM study. So that's what we'll be covering today. We'll see if there's any veracity in that claim. And so without further ado, let me introduce you to Paul Abdul and Christine Erna.
Paul,
Hello,
take it away.
First.
Thank you,
go ahead,
Paul.
Christine.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome. We are so excited to launch this Postal Spotlight for everyone during this current time of COVID-19. The disruption amongst the world is just unbelievable, and we all wanted to be able to share our knowledge and experience and expertise with everyone. Doing things a little bit different. All of us were scheduled to be at a variety of different events this spring. I missed 4 conferences and I miss speaking and educating to people. That's what I love to do. So I am Christine Erna, President of Strategic Postal Advisors. We are a consulting agency that supports customers in all things address quality, workflow improvements, return mail, postage optimization, and a variety of other educational opportunities. And I'm just thrilled to be here with Paul and Scott.
Thanks, Christine.
Awesome. And my name is Paul Abdul. I'm doing some consulting right now for organizations within the industry. And I've really been a focused player on the mail side because there was so much postage spend out there, and a lot of it really comes from the adjacent components, and then we're going to talk a lot about that today. So without further ado, let's go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, and one thing we all have in common is we've all spoken at the National Postal Forum. So hopefully you've got some seasoned veterans here sharing some information. You know, one of the things that Christine shared earlier was this, and I'll let you speak to this, Christine. It's really the idea of not much improvement in the area of address quality. You want to speak to this slide?
Absolutely, and thank you. And I do apologize to the audience. 2019 numbers are out. I didn't get a chance to update this slide, but anyone that wants this updated slide with 2019 numbers, feel free to reach out and I'll definitely share that. But the trend is that, you know, there's been a little bit of improvement here and there, but we are still hovering at the 4% volume of undeliverable mail, which makes up, you know, returned, forwarded, and waste or, you know, recycled mail. And the majority of this is due to people that have moved and filed a change of address or not filed a change of address. And people are not updating their systems of record to be able to mail to that person at the correct address if they're able to find it. It is an extraordinary volume of 5.9 billion mail pieces annually that can't be delivered. And it just, I went to a seminar in 2007. It was an address quality conference put on by the Postal Service. And here we are 13 years later, and not much improvement here. And it's unfortunate because there are many tools and processes and improved workflows that can address this. And I have been speaking and preaching and on my soapbox about this for a very long time. And there's no quick, simple silver bullet to fix anything. It does take processes and an effort on people's part to do that.
Sure.
Yeah,
One of the
that's
things,
very true.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think the problem is going to persist with the current economic environment. I think we're going to have more move updates outside the statistical range we've seen previous. But Paul, one of the things we wanted to do in this session is really look at some specific examples of how this, like how do you get to $3.1 trillion? That's a
Right.
number. And I was hoping to have one of you guys, or at least myself, argue that there's no way in hell that can be true. But some of the plausibility argument of, well, let's take a look at a few examples. And I thought this was a good one from you, Paul. You did a case study for one of the blues that I believe was a national published study, correct?
Yes, and it's been a case study at a few organizations. And what really stood out, and in this example, you'll see 4 envelopes here. There should be a 5th, but we lost one, or it wasn't in the return mail bin that I went through. So 5 months in a row, this communication was attempted to be sent to this individual, and it never made it. And you'll see the yellow sticker that we're all familiar with on the bottom there, that it came back, and over and over. And so for 5 months, they didn't fix this problem. And this is just one person. They had multiple members, millions of members, of course, blues. And this was just one case of it. And you'll notice in the next slide, it's beyond just the postage. I just pointed this out to the senior management team to show them the hard dollar components of it. And then when we dug deeper, we started to look into the workflow behind it and some of the other adjacent expenditures that are always unbudgeted.
Good point. And I wanted to call out to the example with the yellow sticker. The endorsement on that mail piece is move left no address. They could have easily suppressed that communication in the subsequent 4 months until that member called in and to be able to get that updated address. But, it's, and this happens not only in the blues, but this happens in companies around the country that are sending out first class mail, as well as direct mail too, but certainly not as prevalent.
Yeah, the staggering thing about this thing, and I think, we've all discussed this before, is the persistence, right? I mean, if you do nothing, this is what you're going to continue to get. And Paul, if you had a few more months to go through return mail, you probably would have dug out a dozen of these things, without addressing the problem. I mean, it's a cancer at that point. And that's kind of part of the tragedy of this, really, is not having a focus on it is a real issue. So this was the 5-year impact, correct, of that particular case?
Yeah, exactly. And just to give an example, of course, it wasn't an exact science, but pretty longitudinal study as far as a mail center goes, of gathering return mail in buckets that were in the corner, which is, and you've seen it as well, Christine, you go into a shop and what's that in the corner? Aren't those supposed to go out today? Oh, no. Those, they just keep coming back. We put them over there. We'll get to them when we get to them. And lucky for me, there was a 1 month's worth of data that I extrapolated for the year that I did this. It's 10 years ago, to show that it came from multiple sources. We protected the names of the innocents of the outsourced providers that they used as well in this particular data set. But you'll notice that about 10 different types of mailings that went out and the percentages of return mail volume that came with them. One of the things you'll notice, the outsourced provider had the largest one because they're paid to send it out, and they want to send it out, right or wrong, because they're getting revenue. In some cases, they report those errors, but again, nothing's done about it internally. And then when you start adding all that up, postage alone was $133,120 for 2010, and I showed them the 5-year impact of this, and it was adding up significantly. And then when you look at the inbound and outbound combined costs, that is processing, creating the mail piece itself, all that stuff, you're well north of $2 million. And that's the kind of impact that you can have. And that's why, to Scott's point, when he said this is $1 trillion problem, data quality problem to be specific, we said it was plausible, because this is just one example, and we know that there's thousands of organizations out there doing this.
Yeah, the one unfortunate thing, I reached out to Thomas Redman, who was the author of that study, and he had some tools. His office did contact me I was trying to get a little bit more information on kind of what was included in the $3.1 trillion. We know that it's more than just postage, reprint, and mail, right? I mean, there's
Exactly.
inability to collect money. There's all sorts of things that just kind of are pervasive in an organization when that quality is bad. I mean, one of the things with these days is with big data and appending data, you want to append that address of record to things that they've done and activities they've done to further enhance the communication and sellability to those clients. And I have no doubt that's included. So you add all those totals up, and yeah, we had a hard time just kind of, this is ridiculous, so Paul, this is your fun slide here. You want to speak to this for a second?
Yeah.
Don't scare everyone.
Well, one of the things I said to Scott when I originally gave him this slide is, you don't need to read it. If we wanted you to read it, we would have made it bigger. But there's a lot of numbers there, and every color there is a department. And that's what's critical to take away from this. This was a data security incident notification process. So a long way to say, if you made a mistake and they wanted to fix it, this is what it went through. And it took them through over 300 hours to fix this by the time it touched all these different departments. And by the way, the bright yellow one is the Office of the President. And the President had to get involved with these things because of the legal component of it and the size of potential lawsuits or challenges that they would have. And so we estimated that on a regular basis, this was costing them north of $12,000 to start fixing these things. So again, when you start to add up all the incidents that were taking place, all of the mailed pieces to the wrong person, who knows if it was opened by somebody else, all of those things come into play and start adding to the trillion-dollar equation.
Good point. And I would say, to fix the problem here at $12,000 does not take into account, excuse me, if this was a Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services mailing, which they have regulations to follow. And if they don't meet those regulations and, or they go through an audit and they're fined, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars because of errors associated with data. And again, one example.
Yeah, so one of the things we wanted to do wasn't just kind of address hey, there's a $3.1 trillion fire going on in your backyard. You want to put it out? Kind of like, here's a fire hose to do that. And so this was Thomas Rudman's slide. He was, like I said, the author of that HBR, Harvard Business Review article. And it really illustrates something that we've been promoting for a long time, which is, by the time you get to the print and mail section, in my opinion, when you're doing address hygiene and putting it into the mail, you're kind of treating the symptoms at that point. You still have cancer, guys. I hate to tell you, data cancer is kind of not easy to address, but the easiest and most implementable thing you can do right away is create a structure where data at entry is standardized and input into that CRM. I mean, it's the simplest thing someone can do, and it's cheap.
Much cheaper.
It's like literally fractions of cents per record, right? And when
absolutely.
Yeah, so you look at what, you go back to this thing and you understand what one record costs. How many records can you clean at a fraction of a cent before you, are getting a return on investment? That's probably one address for, you've done it. So.
Exactly. Well, and Scott, to your point, if even they got half of them right, or a percentage of it, that 3.1 trillion could go down to 2 trillion. So it can be certainly chipped away at.
Well, let's talk about some numbers that, Scott had a hard time digesting $3.1 trillion.
Oh, yeah, I do.
So the statistics on the slide that we showed early on the undeliverable as addressed mail, that, 5.9 billion undeliverable mail pieces that happen every year to the Postal Service actually cost them in operating costs $1.8 billion to have to retouch and rehandle that mail.
They'd
So
love that money back.
we know the financial strains that the Postal Service is going through. I'm sure they would love $1.8 billion back in their operating budgets.
Well, think about that too. If you have information going back to 2004, that's a lot of billions. When you add up 16
Quick
years
math.
later.
All right, I don't do math in my head, but it's still a lot of money. But
it's the rationale for giving a discount for address quality and NCOA.
Exactly.
But the thing is it, again, I mean, you're addressing the symptom and not curing the problem. But you got to do whatever you can, I suppose. So Christine, you've also been engaged in some other kind of similar. I guess we both have. We worked together on some of these things.
Yes. Analysis of undeliverable as addressed mail. I mean, or return mail. And, Paul's example is, the same thing that I've been doing, and we're just using different tools to do that with.
Sure.
The example on the screen right here is a calculator targeted to chief financial officers. And this particular tool was built with CFOs included in the process so they could identify the numbers that were important to them to look at.
So important to talk to the guys who care about the money.
Absolutely. You want them as your champions in an organization to improve these types of processes.
Yeah.
So I ask a customer to fill out these 13 questions. And it identifies the volume of their monthly outgoing first-class mail. In this example, it's 1.8 million mail pieces. They have 5.4% of undeliverable or return mail. In their case, they have a large amount, 50% of their undeliverable mail that are bills, which means somebody owes them money.
Right.
And the average bill amount is $500. And this particular example is for a utility company. So let's think about all the utility companies around the country and that they mail to every single resident that gets service. And when people move and they owe their last bill or whatever the case may be, and they don't pay it, that affects the utility's bottom line and cash flow. So going through answering the rest of these questions, what percentage of updated addresses is the company able to correct themselves? If they can't, are they turning over accounts to collection agencies to try and find the people and collect the money?
And getting
There's a cost to do that.
Yeah.
What was that, Scott?
And getting a fraction. If you're going to a collection agency, that you've lost already. You're getting a fraction of what you owed. I mean, it's the game.
And right, and it's a write-off of bad debt, and nobody wants that. The solution that this particular tool utilizes is for a return mail solution that utilizes CAS and NCOA as well as proprietary change of address to find customers. And their success rate for business to consumer is 40 to 60%. So in the analysis behind this dashboard is 2 worksheets of calculations. And these calculations will show what the net impact of undeliverable mail is to an organization. So for this utility company that had, 50% of their undeliverable mail be a bill or receivable with an average of $500, this is the annual impact to their bottom line annually, $29 million.
Wow.
That number is going to get people to stand up and pay attention, especially if you're in the right audience. To your point, Paul, to confirm, you need to be talking to the finance people.
And let's hope, right? Because I think when there's been a challenge in these cases, is sometimes it's embarrassing for people who are in the mail centers to admit some of these things are happening. But I think it's something they need to go with confidence to finance, or take somebody like a Christine to really dig deep into this and demonstrate what could happen, because all of a sudden you're going to ask for more budgets one year and they're going to say why. And if you can find some money here, you'll keep some people employed and maybe
even if they got
improve your.
even if they got half of this,
Of course.
Yeah,
even a quarter of it.
the frustration on it, well, I shouldn't air my dirty laundry on these webinars like this, but the frustration I've had in the past is absolutely correct. The CFO is really the only one who cares about this stuff. You can talk to functionaries in the mailroom all day long, and you can point this out, and they're like, "Oh, I'm just here in the mailroom," and it's kind of amazing when you look at different addresses, and we all know this because we've tested these solutions before. There's different varieties of address hygiene solutions out there that do different things with data.
They do.
Yeah, it's kind of why you never see certain solutions in these environments ever.
Yes.
But occasionally, you'll come across, 1 out of 100 people, you'll be like, you're using what solution for that? You're okay. It can be unlooked at anything else. But again, you're right. The CFO is the only one who seems to really take notice.
Well, the other part of the catastrophe here is, you talked about the people in the mailrooms kind of shrugging and not knowing. I've been in, more mailrooms and organizations that I want to count, but not everyone is counting and measuring their undeliverable mail, which, is the first step in trying to conquer it. You can't manage what you don't know. So I will share with everyone, if you need a worksheet, an Excel worksheet to capture this data, happy to share it with you. Certainly reach out and I can send that to you. Very simple spreadsheet just to count on a daily basis the volume of undeliverable mail. And that would be the first step to realizing what kind of a problem you have.
Yeah, I'm trying kind of chuckling because Paul told me in kind of a funny way about him going through all those return, the actual act of going through the return mail pieces and looking at them. I'm like, you did what?
So in this example of this dashboard, I did this analysis for another company. It happened to have been an auto financing company. And if you can imagine, their receivable is, the cost of an automobile. That's what their asset is when an undeliverable mail piece comes back and, they owe car payments. So they got, we went into the mail room and there was just, dozens and dozens and dozens of letter trays, 200,000 return mail pieces a day. So do the math.
There's some organizations that don't send out 200,000 pieces a day.
Right. So even if you take out 50% of that of people that may have auto pay, set up, the impact of running this financial calculator on that volume, the net impact to the organization was just,
astronomical.
Skyrocketed this number on the screen.
You know what? You bring up a good point there too, Christine, is that let's say you're sending out mail that doesn't have to even be sent out. Let's start there if they're on auto pay. That's a data quality issue on your workflow within your software that's producing the documents or not sending it via an electronic format.
Or respecting client wishes of communication preference.
Exactly.
This kind of reminds me, this isn't too off topic, but I think last year at Explorer, a lot of the content provided in that particular event was, customer experience.
Yeah.
What experience are you providing your clients? Is it ingratiating to them, or are they going to want to do business with you more? Kind of what's all the effect of that? And it's interesting, no one wants to feel like they're not being communicated with appropriately,
Well, and we talked about the cost to acquire a new customer versus maintaining your relationship with your existing customer. The cost is extraordinary. And you have, the issue is not about the physical mail. The issue is about the process to maintain your customer account and relationship with that customer. And if you don't have the processes in place to always know where that customer is, that's the tragedy.
Yeah. One of the things we discussed earlier too is, what's the root cause of this problem, right? I mean, where does it all? I mean, you could say it's data at entry, and that's just a tool, right? I mean, here's a tool to help you. I think, based off of our prior discussions, I think the real root cause is an ownership issue, right? I mean, who's taking ownership of this data? Yeah, exactly. They are the other guy. And what's fascinating about that is you can tell if someone has ownership of that data, because their 19 to 48 month NCOA returns start showing up, and it's like, okay, well, this has never been updated. Why is that? And most people, and Christine and Paul, you can both speak to this very well, is that, hey, guess what? The NCOA database is limited. After that 48 month and 1 day period, you no longer have a return, and they just go into this bucket of permanently bad without really doing something drastic. I wouldn't say proprietary change of address is drastic, but a CFO might disagree with that when they look at the price of it, right? I mean, it's not cheap.
So interestingly enough, one of the educational sessions I give is on reading your CAS and NCOA reports.
Right.
It's amazing how many people have just never looked at those. Number one, to understand the invaluable information that's contained within those reports. And to your point, Scott, the daily delete file, people don't know what that is. And that is at 48 months and 1 day that the change of address drops out of the Postal Service's database of change of address. And if you're not gathering and taking that information and updating it in your system, it's lost forever. And if it's an existing client and you've lost them, that's just a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a friend that got divorced, and his wife, he stayed in the house. His wife moved out, and he wasn't getting any of her mail at the end of 18 months. She's gone at 19 months, and she's like, why the hell am I getting all of her mail all of a sudden? And I'm like, no one's updating your address record. You're probably likely to continue to get that always, just so you know.
Exactly.
It's funny when you see the artifacts of that in real life just kind of rear their ugly head,
Right. So the slide we have up on the screen right now is the impact of poor address quality on the selling process. And this example shows 100,000 mail pieces, 16% with address errors, affecting 16,000 mail pieces. And if you had a 1% response, that would affect 160 returns. And you had a closing ratio of 50%, which everyone would love. So now you're down to 80% of the pieces with a lost sale. And let's say the value of that sale is $50,000. Maybe it's a great print job. So during the course of a year, or the sale of the year, is $4 million. And you multiply that times 4 times a year, $16 million, and a 5-year, $80 million impact for undeliverable as addressed mail, and the impact to the sales operation by not getting the mail piece to where it's going. Those are real numbers. And
then marketing gets in trouble for not putting the right information out there, right?
They didn't the wrong message.
They did. Right. The message never got there.
Well, this is the part of what marketing doesn't understand when they start doing the analysis of their campaigns, that they're not taking into account the mail pieces that were not delivered, and it skews all of their results.
Right. Or reduces the response ratio too.
Without question.
Right? And so it starts to mess with it, and then people question the campaign and the value.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's not little drips. It's just these huge buckets of money that get, poured onto this 3.1
trillion. Yes.
Mountain, I mean, it's just, I really, if there's one regret I have in this thing, it's not understanding or getting the IBM study and the methodologies of what went into it. But, we can only go with what we have. It's much higher than the IDC study that was hundreds of billions of dollars. Paul, you made a point to me earlier in your sales process. It's like, Mr. CFO, even if I'm wrong by half, you still have a pretty significant problem, right?
Right. it's important to, they'll always call you out on numbers, especially when they're significant. And, even fractions of those numbers are significant. So, in some cases, what you did was very good, Christine, and where you asked them to fill in their own data, so then they can, you can't argue with their own data. If in the absence of that, when I used data that was sitting in their mail center, I could tell them that, and their staff was there looking at me count it, and I didn't make up the numbers.
Yeah.
And I took pictures of it. I showed them. Here's your 6 bins of mail. And when they start to realize the realistic component of it and fractions of it, you really can't go wrong. And that's, I think, what you're trying to say here, Christine, is that, what some people see might be some hardline costs on postage costs, which usually start the conversation. Why is my postage bill going up? And people complain about a bump in price from USPS, which we know in the US is an act of Congress to get done. And what's beneath it's worse.
Yes. I mean, we talked about the, $1.8 billion operational cost to the Postal Service, but each company has the same exact problem here as the iceberg theory. You're only dealing with the tip of the iceberg when you're looking at the postage on the mail piece or the print and handling and labor cost, with the physical mail. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not about the mail, because behind that mail, you have everything below the iceberg. And in this example, that's pretty big underneath there. And those examples from the dashboard, as well as Paul's example, just shows you how the costs can keep churning and escalating and growing. And it's like a snowball running down the mountain. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And next thing you know, you're at $3.1 trillion.
And so I got a question for both of you. How much of this do you think has to do with deniability?
Deniability?
I don't have, no. How could that be? I don't have, no. It's, and you're, especially when, because I got to tell you, the reason that it's kind of a loaded question for me, the mail.dats don't lie, right? It's
right.
It's, that's your postage, man. Like, kind of doing a Joe Biden there, I guess. But, that is your postage. It's a codified document proving something that you owe the postage statement. And we take those things all the time from clients. Give us your mail.dat, we'll reanalyze it, and we'll tell you what it could have been. Sure. And they're like, that's impossible. And I'm like, well, we just produced a new mail.dat for the same mailing. How is that impossible? And then
let's take a walk over to accounting. Come on.
So the other point with that, and it's a very good point about the mail.dat that rolls up into your business customer gateway and your Postal One dashboard, and looking at your mailer scorecard to look at your UAA volume and whether or not you're within the threshold or exceeding it. And the point being, just because there's a threshold doesn't mean that you should be using it. It's a disservice. It's a disservice that this mail is in the mail, 6 billion mail pieces annually, just floating around there, going back and forth and being thrown away.
Yeah.
Total waste.
Yeah.
And, one of these days, Scott, I know you like to dive in the Southern Hemisphere, so do I, but we got to dive and take a look see if we can see an iceberg like this on a sunny day.
I got to tell you, Paul, there's less of them out there. I mean,
this is true.
I went diving in Hawaii a few years ago, and everything was dead because the water, the coral just kind of completely died because the water temperature rose 2 degrees. There's no ice.
True.
I'll tell you, it's sad. You better go soon.
That's right.
So deniability, are we in agreement that that's part of the issue? Is that some of these?
No, it's not. Well, I mean, I go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead. Okay, I was going to say that I don't think people deny it if you point it out. I think more of it is ignorance of not knowing that it exists. Yeah. And then once it's pointed out and you do walk over to the finance department or you ask for a few bills, what have you paid, and show some of those things that are with their own data, it certainly changes the conversation. And they may or may not still act, because I still have people like that. And I think, you know, you, Scott, and Christine would agree that you've shown people, here, I'm going to hand you some money back if you fix this, and they still don't want it,
Yeah.
which boggles our mind. But the point is that at least once they're educated or become aware of it. So I would say it's more awareness than deniability.
And I would agree with that, Paul. It's you know, a big part of what I deliver in educational presentations is about address quality, undeliverable mail, and the solutions that are out there to fix it. And totally agree, it's ignorance and not speaking to the right people within the organization.
Right.
And I try and approach, you know, a mailroom supervisor with the knowledge and information that they can run it up the ladder, or recommend to them to put a postal governance process in.
Sure.
So that everyone involved within the organization can tackle the problem together, rather than just trying to have it come from the bottom up a lot of times. And that's a big hurdle for a lot of people.
I had a friend that used to say, "Take me to your leader," because I think that was important a couple of times to really get to the bottom of it.
Very good point.
You guys are making me feel bad. I guess my closing ratio should be better. I hope Brian doesn't see this. So do we have any questions, comments, or concerns out there from some of the people we've invited to this, Christine?
We did get a comment from Summer Cutler, who had, you know, acknowledged the same challenges with getting people to take action on their data. And Joe Kern also commented that he's enjoying the session. So thank you for that, Joe.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone spending some time. I know it's valuable these days. And hopefully you got some value out of this. We want to keep these things going if we feel like there's obviously the benefits for the audience. So as long as I think those that analog coming back is positive and people getting a positive effect from this, we're not trying to sell anything here so much as just kind of edify on what's going on. I think there's been a little bit of a dearth of education going on with the Postal Forum this year getting kind of canceled. And so, hopefully we can fill some of those things in for the audience. And I think the next topic we're going to cover because this is its own thing. I mean, we could probably, Christine, Paul, you probably have an idea how much time it would take to comprehensively talk about this. But suffice to say, it's more than an hour. We're going to try to distill it down for you, right?
Yes. Small bites, slow bites. And welcome feedback from anyone watching this or the recording, that if you have particular topics that you want us to discuss, we welcome any input. And I want to thank everyone that joined us today, and especially my colleagues here, Scott and Paul. This has been a great inaugural Postal Spotlight. So thank you all.
It was great to participate. And Scott, I wanted to ask you one thing before we sign off. If you were to give people one thing they should take away, what do you think it should be?
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul, because there's really two things, I think. One of them is ownership, right? I mean, someone in an organization has to be tasked to own this problem. And, as you know, Paul, there's KPIs when you're in sales, right? I mean, there should be KPIs for data governance too.
I think the world should be paid like a sales guy.
Well,
you deliver something, you get something. How about that? Anyway.
Yeah, and
I digress.
And if you don't, sorry, your check's lower this week, right? And the other thing, Paul, is the data up front, right? Put something up front with the CSR, doesn't have to rely on, I mean, that is a big part of the problem. Most people don't realize this, but we don't have a standardized way of dealing with the U.S. address. And if you don't believe me, look at 12 different CRMs, and you'll probably find 5 different ways of how they
Absolutely.
Very good point to conclude on, Scott. So thank you for that.
There's a 2.5. Let's all define what an address block is. That would help a lot.
There you go.
Have a great day, everyone. Hope to see you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Okay, take care.